Hi there, we're here in Amsterdam to talk about this fantastic new book that I've been involved with. My name is Ben Oakley and I'm the editor of the book, helping shape it and make it flow a bit. The main protagonist is Steve, who is the main author and developed the initial idea. And then Uli is the main photographer, and there's his and other people's photographs throughout the book. And of course, we've got the brilliant picture you love on the front cover by Steve Wilkins, and that's one of your favourite shots, and we all love it too. And also, it says here, Husman Publishing at the end, and Addo is the publisher. I'm just going to briefly ask each person to talk a little bit about their role. Steve, tell us more about your role in this book and how it came about.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm working for Mistral currently and have been for the past 11 years, and we've got to about a 5 or 6 year point in my history of being with them. And Addo was one day getting excited about the idea of maybe doing a book about Mistral specifically. And we let it sit for a while, and then a couple of years passed, and then we said, right, we should probably do this. But then when I decided that perhaps going ahead would be a good thing, we thought, well, just a book full of pictures wouldn't really be the best way forward, and neither should it just be about Mistral, because in fact, Mistral is part of a much wider family of brands which were, very influential with the windsurfing in Europe back in the day when things really kicked off. So it went from being a small little concept to something that's quite frankly got quite,
it's quite
enormous.
Weighty.
It has indeed. And I think actually one thing that happened also is that Uli came into my life and then came into Mistral, having been a photographer for many years with the company. And, we toyed with the idea of doing a calendar with Uli, and we did that. And following that, Uli got excited about the concept of what we were thinking as well. And before you knew it, it just blossomed from there. And, where we are now is quite incredible.
So, Uli, how many pictures are in here? You'll know the exact number.
There's about 350 pictures in there.
Fantastic.
But it's maybe interesting to know that I have a file for this book on my computer, and it contains 7,500 pictures. And that was the base from which I selected the photos for this book.
And also, I think, Uli, there are photos in the book which never published before.
There's quite a few pictures that have never been published before. And of course, we have to point out not all of these pictures are from me. There's a few very very well-known photographers like Steve Wilkins and Daryl Wong, and Swiss photographer Daniel Foster, who's a famous yachting photographer, and a few others. Cliff Webb, a British photographer who followed the World Cup for a long time, and quite a few more pictures. We got some beautiful shots from Nash, Hawaii, and also from other less known people. But altogether, it was a selection of 7,500
I know
shots.
Uli talked about his long nights trying to pick out which picture to use, and we feel your pain, but the result is well worth it. So you mentioned some pictures haven't been seen before. That links to the subtitle, Windsurfing's Untold Stories, which is about untold pictures, but also the untold stories. Steve, who did you interview for this book? What kind of people did you try and connect with? Not a whole list, but what groups of people?
Not a whole list. Well, to be fair, Addo provided the list. He said, you should talk to this guy and this person and that person, and Jolle Bischler, of course, from Club Mistral fame. And so I sat down one summer's afternoon and started going through the list in the phone book, ringing people up and deciding who to talk to first. And I started with the, easy people first, and worked ever more progressively to who I thought would be more challenging. And that in itself was actually, was in the end a good decision. I mean, for example, the last person interviewed was Robbie Nash. Whereas I think Ernst was one of the last, Ernst Prada was probably one of the last people from the Mistral dynasty as such that I interviewed with. I started with a chap called Peter Reinschmidt, who was involved with a lot of the wetsuits and accessories, who was a very interesting chap, but he was very easy to talk to and had a lot of philosophically deep things to say about not just the brand, but about windsurfing in general, the brand. So yes, so that was, from those people, I began to get a bit of a story, and each one of the characters were very similar but different, you know, all very much entrepreneurial, all very driven, all very passionate, all very headstrong. And maybe that's what you need to make brands work, I'm not sure. But of course, what we do know from the interviews is that cause some conflicts, which I think maybe that's what you need to create a great product at the end of the day.
But also there's 19 chapters in here, and for me, being involved with it, it also tells the European side of the windsurfing story. There's lots of interesting stuff happening in California and Hawaii, but do you think that's a reasonable account, the European story?
Well, yes, actually, I mean, having been a windsurfer myself, you know, as a young lad, you know, growing up in that windsurfing scene and being a professional, semi-professional for some number of years, when time passed and we got to where we are now, what was very obvious was the American story had been told ad nauseum, you know, over and over, I think. But in reality, of course, it flowed into Europe, and it was the Europeans I felt that really sort of has got some traction behind it and invested heavily. They saw something that they could monetize ultimately and make into a great sport for people. So yes, and that absolutely became the driver of the publication, to talk about the European history. And of course, to do that, you need to talk to the protagonists. You need to talk to the people who were creating the best and the greatest brands that you possibly could imagine out of Europe. So yes, that's really what the thrust is.
Okay, and we're going to change tack a bit now. We're going to have some yes/no questions. I'm going to ask a question. You're going to either say yes or no if you agree, and then we're going to just drill down into that a bit. So the first question is, windsurfing was successful in the 1970s and 80s because the lifestyle was different to what it is today.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Now, Uli, I've heard you talk about this before. Tell us why you think that's true.
Well, when I was in my late teens, we were watching films like the Concert of Woodstock, and we experienced the Summer of Love in San Francisco, 1966.
You experienced it. You're not that old. You mean you saw it from afar?
Well, it flowed over to to Europe.
Yeah.
It was a wave,
Yeah.
and there was films like Easy Rider.
Oh
And
yes.
we were watching films like Crystal Voyager, one of the most famous surfing movies,
Yeah.
with the music of Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
And all this West Coast lifestyle was influencing our lives.
And what about your position, your lives in Germany at that time in the 70s? Tell us about Germany in the 70s.
Germany in the 70s was still, even though it was 25, 30 years after World War II, it was still a place where you were maybe suppressed from your history. And it was in all the families, and we were taught about it in school. And when we were traveling abroad, people talked to us. Some people, you know, showed us their dislike. And it was still a time where, especially in Germany, we were longing to get rid of this gray post-war feeling.
You have a bit of colour.
Exactly. And that's
An orange color, eh?
Yeah.
and when I first saw this picture in a magazine that a friend of mine had just bought a few days before, I looked at it and I thought, wow, this is just so incredible. And I started looking through this magazine. It was one of the first magazines that Peter Brockhaus, who we will talk about later, has published. And I saw these pictures and I thought, this is just unbelievable. I have to do this.
I want some of that. So it became a part of your identity in doing it.
It was.
You were a sailor, eh?
I was a sailor, so I knew about, you know, the wind and how to put the sail in the wind and all that. And it was so fascinating that you could sail on a board. You didn't need any ropes and you didn't need any winches, and you just had a wooden boom and a board.
And you were connected with the whole thing.
And that was it. And it was just absolutely fascinating.
Let's turn to Ado. So what do you think about lifestyle being different than 70s and 80s to now?
Oh yeah, for sure the lifestyle was different. But also in my view that it came started with a new lifestyle. And for instance, the color, the multi-colored sails had influence on the beachwear, on the sportswear. So that was also a new introduction of colorful sports, and that was amazing as well. And that, in effect, there from windsurfing, the beachwear was starting, and the beach life was starting.
No, we'd say a new lifestyle, leisure wear, and so.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and not because promoting Mistral, but Mistral was the first brand with a windsurfing apparel line, and that came especially through the full multicolor sales with the M dot. That was bomb. That was a picture shot in your face.
Yeah, well, it's certainly very different to the yachting and sailing scene, wasn't it? With white sails and it was quite nice being different to when you went to a sailing club, being different.
Absolutely.
I'm different to you. I'm going to go and do this, and that difference was quite a nice feeling.
And I think that windsurfing was from the beginning not that classic sailing.
Yeah.
Robbie said in the book, it's a form of flying.
Yeah.
That was interesting as well.
Well, Steve, you talk about this form of gliding as well, but we won't go into that now. I want to move to the next question, which I want you to lead on. The next question, is this book focused too strongly on Windsurfer Mistral, F2, Windsurfing Hawaii and Naish? Is it focused too strongly on those brands?
No.
No. Really?
Let's
Some people might say that.
yeah, but that's deliberate. That's why we're asking it. And
But it has a reason, in my view.
Okay.
Because they were not from the beginning. The other brands, like Windglider, Klepper, Highfly, they were not from the start, and also not Mistral. But the first brands are, in my view, 10Kate and Windsurfing Hawaii. These brands, you can credit them for the start of windsurfing. And Mistral came, in fact, through the fact that Brockhaus was frustrated about 10Kate there in 1976, but Brockhaus was already starting in 1973 with 10Kate. So in my view, 10Kate and Windsurfing Hawaii deserve the credits.
So, Steve, what's your view? If you were trying to persuade someone of your view?
Well, I personally, I think that the reality is that this is less about the brands and more about the people. Because for every brand, there's a person behind it. So if you look at the Brockhurst or the Larry Stanleys of this world, or the Robbie Naishes or the Rick Naishes, forget the brand, forget the tag, focus on the individual, focus on what they created. And, Adam and I have joked about this in the past, where if you were to cherry pick all the greatest individuals of the time thinking about stuff, put them together and create one brand, how would it have been? But what you had was a bunch of people actually not fighting against each other, but trying to say, I can do it better than you, I can do it better than you. I think that's the driver. So if people get all... the caveat I would say on this is that I know even today, people have brand loyalty. People they're pro-Fanatic, pro-Starboard, pro-whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, let's keep it real. It's still to do with people. And I think that's where the book really delves into it. We don't actually, we talk about the brand for sure, but actually we're interviewing the person, the people that bled for this sport, who sold their soul for it. Making money was a secondary consideration for most of these people. In fact, most people didn't make any money. It was actually just, people went bust on a daily basis, but it was just pure passion to get the job done and to feel the stoke and to share that with everybody. And just to come back on the previous question, I'd just to add, something that Charlie Mesmer said I think really struck me, and it made perfect sense, and that was that, when you talk about the surfing, the cult of surfing, we were watching surfing people from the 50s through the 60s, and we wanted to slice that action. But how would you get that in Europe? So we had a surf sport, effectively, with a sail in it, and people were then taking to the inland waterways. And and there are a lot of brands that profited from that, and who were selling product where they'd never thought the Quicksilver could sell board shorts inland. Mistral could create a whole apparel line inland, all through the surfing impetus and the iconoclastic feeling of it, the Hawaiiana of it, if you like,
And we should remember, you're saying it's about people, and Peter Brockhouse in particular, he was heavily involved with Tenkate and Windsurfer, then Mistral and F2, and his story is fascinating of that journey through. And you also spoke to Larry Stanley as well in Hawaii.
Well, yes, exactly, and and Adam mentioned it. We start with Tenkate, and there you go through to and the Schweitzer family. Then obviously you move into guys like Larry Stanley, the guys living in the islands, where actually the original windsurfer was absolutely useless. I mean, I say useless. It was well, not useless,
It wasn't
but
designed for the waves.
That's what I mean. It wasn't fit for purpose. It was not the thing that they wanted there. They were all of a surfing culture, and so they wanted to take what was a rudimentary concept and to create a foot strap board and high wind sails, and that's what they ended up doing. And then that was shared with the rest of the world. And when you read some of the statistics in the book about how there was at one period like 9,000 or 10,000 custom boards being made in Germany alone. But where would they get the booms from? Where would they get the masts from? Where would they get the foot straps from? Where would they get the fins from? The fin boxes, all this stuff was coming out of places like, well, specifically from windsurfing Hawaii.
Okay, let's go to the third question, which is the main commercial development of windsurfing happened in Europe, not the USA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Uli, would you like to just expand why you say absolutely?
Well, the first thing Joel Schweitzer did, which was totally important for the development of windsurfing, was he sent Steve Wilkins a windsurfing board.
Yeah.
Steve Wilkins was a well-known surf photographer, and he sent him a windsurfing board, and he said, "Get some pictures of this windsurfing board for me." And this picture on the cover of our book was a picture from the very first roll of film he ever took of windsurfing. And on the first roll was this picture. And if this picture and a few more of these pictures on his first 2 rolls, he only shot 2 rolls on his first day. If these pictures hadn't been taken, I think windsurfing would have not developed the way it did, because it carried the feeling, like Steve said before, of surfing to the inland waters. People felt they were surfing, but in fact they were windsurfing, and that made it all possible. That combination made it possible.
But I think also another problem has been raised, because Hallo Schweitzer will cost a lot of millions of royalties, but he has no clue, and also Tenkate, of marketing. And let's be honest, Peter Brockhouse, he made windsurf big in Europe, because with Verkauf Nieuwe Schulung, with the start of his magazine, and there was a moment that Brockhouse sold more in Bavaria in number of boards in 1973 or 74 than the whole Schweitzer in the whole USA.
Yeah, over many years.
So
One of the keys to that was the instruction prior to
Exactly,
purchase,
the
and there's a lot more about that in here.
yeah, the marketing, in my view, was
proper strategy for tuition, because we all know, guys, that learning windsurfing, trying to teach yourself was a mission, and hence schools had to come first, and learning was prior to purchase. Were made.
And it gave people a chance to trial it without too much risk in a safe environment with supervision, and then decide whether they're going to buy. And so Peter and the VDWS, it's founded in 1974 by Peter and others in Innsfried. That was the cornerstone, and in France as well. France is a big sort of powerhouse as well. Let's move on to some other questions. We've got 2 more questions. These aren't yes nos, these are more discussion points. So what circumstances made windsurfing boom in Europe? Why did it work here and not in other places?
USA, for instance, in the beginning. What actually is the more or less the answer is the same. I think people were attracted. It was a time where people tried a new sport. It was solistic. But the main reason was the promotion around the sport. That was for me the trigger point.
And there weren't many mass-produced sort of items you could use on the water in those days, were there? There was the Sunfish in 1952, the Hobie Cat, and then the Windsurfer, and then the laser dinghy followed after that. Yeah.
But what we said, it is not classic sailing, and suddenly the youth take it up, so they feel it was a kind of fear breaking free, a feeling of that you break free underwater.
It was almost as novel as the hula hoop, you know, really the windsurfing in America, and you know, it was almost a novelty. It was never really. It never seems to have been taken that seriously, and I think probably when it hit, you know, when you look at the footage, you see a lot of, I wouldn't say hippies, but it was hippie-esque, wasn't it? I mean, there's a lot of people that would just tune in and drop out and
Lots of
do
facial hair.
Yeah, lots of facial hair, and you know, it was Volkswagen combis and all that sort of stuff, and absolutely, and because they were what were they doing? They were buying fully into the surfing culture lifestyle, regardless of the fact none of them could necessarily surf, but they managed to become part-way surfers, and we've actually seen that replicated with stand-up paddleboarding to some extent, which, you know, and that's just a cheap marketing shot to how can we ramp up the interest in stand-up paddleboarding? Well, let's to connect it with a surfing lifestyle, and windsurfing actually didn't do it so cynically. They were it was far more obvious, the connection, and of course the Hawaiians knew that. They just jumped on it, and of course that's where it became, well, to want a better word, hardcore. But windsurfing through America was very socially orientated. It was more barbecues and girls and guys and hanging out and that sort of thing. But I must say America is, because we've even, again, putting my brand hat on, trying to deliver a product to America is a massive task. It is a huge country, and there's a lot of bugger all in the middle of it. You know, there's a lot of things going on the coast, but in the middle of it,
I think in the Midwest you might struggle. Yeah.
Well, no, it's difficult. It's different, isn't it? Because there in America, the cultures are very divided between you've got the coastal, and you've got the inland, the mountains, and you've got the prairies, and all that. It's very.
My theory is that people who windsurf often tend to be aligned with mountain lifestyle, snowboarding, skiing, hiking,
Sport de glisse.
Mountain biking. So there's a very large population in Europe that live within 3 or 4 hours drive of the mountains, including Scandinavia, Czechoslovakia. So I think that's partly to do with it.
Sliding sports.
Yeah, gliding sport. Yes.
Sliding sports.
Yeah.
And of course, mountain biking was an interesting. I mean, I know Uli would know about this. I mean, the mountain biking became a big thing, and it was actually became a direct competitor to windsurfing, particularly in Europe. It was one. In fact, you buy windsurfing magazines and see mountain bikes being sold next to windsurfing equipment.
Yeah, it was quite a symbolic change when the editor of Surf magazine in Germany then went to work for the magazine, the mountain bike magazine, in 1989 in Germany. So that sort of signals a bit of a transition, beginning of a transition towards interest in mountain biking. Yeah. Let's go to the last question. How has windsurfing influenced people and other developments? How has it influenced? What's its legacy? What does it leave?
Well, gee, relationships.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're all married to people.
Well, Uli and I are married to windsurfing ladies that we knew when we were younger, and they became the love of our lives. And I think that, you know, every time I look at my wife, I'm full with nostalgia, and I'm sure Uli is the same. But I mean, you know, that is a touchstone for me, and I think I'd probably played the same role for her, as I'm sure Uli would for Jill.
What about the other board sports? I think you have kite surfing and.
Well, you're talking about you're talking about sort of, there was a gestation period of windsurfing, and then of course other sports evolved, and they evolved because. Ironically, they evolved because, you know, windsurfing is suited to a particular range of wind conditions and even surf conditions. And I think that, you know, what we were finding was that people were looking for super high-end sports with high winds and high surf, and others are probably more flat water orientated. But it became quite obvious that when windsurfing reached a peak where a lot of people owned shortboards and small sails, there was less people windsurfing in lighter winds, and in actual fact the longboarders sort of dropped away. But so consequently other sports were sought. I mean, kiting came along where people could go out in slightly less wind and have, you know, just as much buzz in jumping and doing tricks. Didn't need the high winds necessarily. And but for the very high winds, people would revert back to the windsurfing. That seemed to be the thing. And of course today we've got foiling, which is very much being created as a low wind sport, actually not as a high wind sport. So what people are doing is filling in the gaps. You know, if the wind strength is this, or the surf is that, or the wind strength is whatever, they can then fill in things and have a full portfolio, you know, of toys.
I'll partly answer my own question. I think, what's the legacy? I think wetsuit design has changed considerably with windsurfing being around. More colourful, more flexible, more athletic, footwear. And what else do you think?
Snowboarding, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, Charlie is the best example for the development of snowboarding. And there used to be the slogan for snowboarding, "Snow is just frozen water." And it was basically the people who were
from O'Neill, in fact.
the people who were windsurfing and surfing in summer were going onto snowboards in winter. And it was the same step that people took from skiing to snowboarding because they wanted to be different. They wanted to be surfer-like, and they wanted to be trendy, and they wanted to be, doing a fun sport rather than a traditional sport.
Okay, I'll be provocative now. Would paddleboarding have happened without windsurfing?
No.
Okay. Steve, this is your...
Well, that's a loaded question. Who's to know? I mean, given that the idea of standing paddling is actually a very ancient concept, but
the windsurfing companies jumped on it at a time of recession in 2009.
well, I think if you bring it up as a contemporary problem, and the contemporary problem was that sport had run its course, windsurfing to some extent, and they were looking for something else, and this very novel idea of standing and using a paddle on a long windsurfer-shaped board ultimately was created.
And you talk about that in here.
Oh yeah, we touch on it a little bit.
It's chapter 18, I think.
Something like that. You know, just in terms of what it's given us.
But chapter 18 is a very interesting chapter. In fact, it's saying, besides the windsurfing Hawaii story, which was for me as well an eye-opener. But the short conclusions from you and Stephen and Ben is really amazing, especially also when it is saying that windsurfing is in fact the mother of all later related fun sports.
Many things.
Kiting came from surfing. Stand-up paddle came, in my view, from windsurfing. And falling definitely.
And falling, the impetus came.
Yeah.
But I think also coming back just to your question, you mentioned wetsuits as being an involvement. But let's face it, wetsuits have been around since the 50s. But the problem is that there wasn't the volume. You got a few spear fishermen and a couple of divers and the odd surfer might use the kit, but the sheer volume of windsurfers created an economic situation where it was worthwhile companies to invest to sell hundreds of thousands of wetsuits, not 50 or 60 or 100 or 1,000, but hundreds of thousands. And so everyone ramped everything up: roof racks, wetsuits,
all the accessories.
Everything went nuts.
It did go nuts in the 90s.
Travel industry.
Yeah.
Travel industry.
Well, there's another chapter in there about
The
that.
windsurfing holiday destinations.
There's lots more.
destinations.
There's lots more in here. Let's call it a day for the moment. And you know, I urge you to look inside this book. It's.
I would like to say something extra. If you see this book, Ben, and you do it by page, it gives you an absolutely happiness feeling, guys.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, we will put a lot of work into this, and I'm sure people will enjoy reading it for many years to come.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.